Welcome back to another episode of our TactileView tutorial here. All right, so now we're going to be diving into objects. So this is going to be a bit of a long one because we kind of have a good bit to cover here. But it's also going to be a great one. So let's go ahead and dive in. On our toolbar here on our left-hand side, we have a number of different icons, kind of almost the lower half of the toolbar here, if you will, that are all color-coded in blue. So you'll see a line that's blue, you'll see a square that's blue, a circle, triangle, kind of a polygon, a curved path, some dots, and a few others. So all these blue ones, you may recall from a previous episode, things color-coded in blue are objects. The convenient thing about objects is you can go back and manipulate them, grab them, move them, resize them after the fact. Or after you've already put them in your document, right? Unlike something that's part of a picture, you kind of have to grab your eraser or maybe use a selection tool to move a chunk of it or something like that. Objects can be manipulated basically anytime after you placed them, which is really, really cool. So I use objects a lot, and I think you will want to as well. And there is a number of other different things you can do with objects that are also useful beyond just the fact that you can manipulate them out later on. So let's start with our line tool here. This is our first kind of object, if you will. And simply, our line tool has a little submenu here where it has a couple different items on it. The first one is line style. So if you wanted something other than a solid line, you can go choose that here. We'll dive into that a little bit more in a moment. The next thing here is turn on repeat. So repeat would be how many lines do you want to draw out. By default, if you just click and draw out one line with repeat off, when you are finished drawing that line, it will stop using the line drawing tool, meaning you'll be back just to your regular mouse pointer. And if you want to draw another straight line, you have to go back and click on your draw straight line tool again. That is with repeat turned off. And so that would be kind of, if you have this little kind of dot equal dot with a slash through it, that is repeat is deactivated or turned off. And so you will just be drawing one line at a time, and you have to go click on the line tool each time. You will also notice this kind of repeat option for all the other objects as well, so that will be a common theme as we get into it. So anyway, if you want to draw out line after line after line after line after line, basically without stopping, that is when you want repeat turned on, so that way you can quickly and easily, without having to go back and click on the line tool each time you want to draw a line, draw out a whole bunch of lines. And the bottom item on here, before we have drawn out a line here, I should say, there will be different options once we have drawn out a line, is to draw only horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. So it locks you into basically drawing perfectly straight lines. So, sometimes it's hard to get that line just perfectly straight, and this tool will help you do it. So it lets you draw perfectly horizontal, perfectly vertical, so straight up and down lines, straight left and right lines, or at 45-degree angles off that as well. So if you want a perfect slanted line, you can do that too. And so this will restrict your movement rather than freehand. Will let you do effectively any angle. You just kind of freehand it and eyeball it, if you will. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw out a straight line here from point to point, like so. There is our straight line, and since I had repeat kind of on there, let me draw out another line, which I don't want to do. I'm going to cancel that. By the way, a nifty little kind of tip for you. If you have a tool like that one open and you kind of want to stop using it, hitting escape will close you out of that tool. A little side tip for you. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go click on this object, right? Because again, the nice part about objects is you can manipulate them and move them after the fact. So now there's my line. I could grab either end of that line, I could resize it, I could remove it around, I could click on the center of it, move it anywhere around my document I so choose, place it however I want, resize it however I want. Voila, there you go. Cool little object. Now, when you are clicked on an object, our line in this case, you can look and there's a submenu with a whole bunch of different options for this. The first one is pretty neat. If you remember back to, I think it was in the first episode we talked about, maybe the second episode, we talked about how you can use TactileView's placement tools to be very precise, or use those placement tools with a screen reader to place things. Well, also you can get to the size and position, which are effectively the same as the placement tool, from this little submenu. So if you want to freehand your line, perfectly fine. Freehand it like that. Right, but I kind of freehand it. It's not level, It's straight, but it's not level. It's just kind of, I have no idea how long it is. I can kind of guess. If that's fine, if that's all you need, then great. But if you need some precision, you can click on it and click on this little first item in your first menu, which if you hover your mouse, there'll be a little label that pops up that says position of starting and end point. If I click on this, it brings up TactileView's same placement tools. These are the same ones we talked about again back in one of the earlier episodes about how you could do these same items with a screen reader. And you can place these in position. You can choose to place them in reference position from the first point and from the left edge and from the top edge if you wanted to. Or most of the time when I'm visually doing this, I really just want to say, oh, I want this line to be a certain length or maybe rotated a certain way. So let's say maybe I wanted my straight line to be 2 inches long. I can go to my length section and I can say 2 inches. Maybe I want it rotated. Let's say right now it's at 3 degrees. That's what I just kind of hand drew it out. Maybe I want it rotated exactly 45 degrees, right? I could do that. I can also choose kind of my end position kind of if I want to as well. Again, I'm not so concerned about that. I will hand place it using my mouse. If I was using a screen reader, then yes, I would want to fill in where I want the beginning and end of my line to be. But in this case, I'm mostly interested in just making sure I have the right rotation or angle and that I have the right length for my line, and I can hit the OK button, and voila, there you go. It switched my line to exactly 45 degrees, which I put in, and it also switched my line to exactly 2 inches long, which I put in. So you can be very precise with your objects as well if you need to. The next thing on a little submenu, again, when we have our line clicked on, if we click away from that, you know that submenu disappears. But while we have our line selected or our object selected, there's some other things. The next one is an alias. So an alias, typically speaking, you're only really going to use aliases probably if you are tackling creating a graphic, again, with a screen reader and you're doing it accessibly. So basically what you will be doing is you'll draw out a whole bunch of objects. You know, by the time you're done creating your graphic, you might have 30 different objects on your, on your document here, right? Well, you need an easy way to tell them apart. And to give them an alias, which is basically a nickname, if you will, is an easy way to do that. So there's an option in our little submenu to do that, and you click on it and add an alias in there. You can also do that accessibly via the menu system as well with your screen reader. So basically it's just a nickname to help you identify it a little faster and a little bit easier. So I could nickname this one if I wanted to, like 2-inch line at 45 degrees, or something like that. And if I only had one of them, that would be a very easy way to go back and pick that out from a list of objects, later on if I want to move it or change it. So that's all the little alias is. It's supposed to alias. I think it's supposed to look like a little tag that you would like a close tag or something that you could put on something. So that's your alias as a nickname. Next, you can center it. If you click this, it just centers it horizontally, so left and right. It does not center it vertically, but basically, if you just need to center your stuff real quick, there's just a center button. There is also a restrict movement. You might remember how we could restrict the movement while drawing to just up, down, left, right, and at 45-degree angles. Well, we can also restrict movement as well as drawing. So that's what this option is. So if I click on this and I go to move it, you'll notice I can move it perfectly straight, just up and down, just left and right, or just at 45-degree angles. So if we're trying to shift things over very precisely, that can be useful sometimes. The next item on our menu here is line style. So you remember we could have changed that before we drew the line if we wanted to, but we can change it now as well. So we'll do that. If we click on line style, here, we can choose kind of the visibility of the line, whether you just want it normal or whether you want the gaps in between lines if you're using like a dotted line to be transparent, or if you want them to block out the background kind of thing. You come down a little bit further and we have a drop down menu with a whole laundry list of different dot dash style patterns. So there's dash, there's dot dash, there's a whole bunch of different gap sizes, different length lines. So there's a whole bunch. So you can scroll down here and find any one that looks good to you. I'll choose kind of a broken. It switches between long dash, short dash, long dash, short dash kind of thing. And you can also choose your line thickness here as well. So I'll choose with 5 for mine. That'll be kind of pixels. And I'll press OK, and there we go. Now my line has switched from that solid line to be that dot dash line. And if I stretch my line out a little bit longer, you'll notice that it keeps that exact same line style there. Now a quick note about line styles: when you have changed it and you go back to draw another line, so I go draw another line, you will see it remembered your line style. So if you were trying to do different line styles, you may want to make sure that you either go back and change it after you've drawn out your next one, or change that line style back to whatever you wanted beforehand. So for that reason, because I don't want everything I'm doing to be a dashed line like that, I'm going to go back and switch my line back to a solid. But there you go. You can change your line style for any of your objects to any sort of dash or dot dash or long short dash, or there, as you probably saw on the list, there is a lot. I think I want to say there was probably nearly 30. I didn't count admittedly, but there was a bunch. of different options to choose from, and so you can get pretty darn creative and customize that however you like. We also have that same option for repeat. Again, we could have turned repeat on or off before we drew out the line if we wanted to, but we have the option as well after the fact. We also have that restrict drawing. So as where we had restrict movement, we have restrict drawing as well. Again, this option was available to us before we drew out the line in the first place, but you have that too if you need it. And then we have the next couple options are kind of lesser known features. I'm going to gloss over them just really quickly right now so that you know what they are when you stumble across them. I forget if I referenced them earlier or not. I think I probably did when we touched on the Explore Mode button in an earlier episode. But these are for a portion of TactileView or some hardware accessories that can come with TactileView. So we have one that is called Audio Styles. It's represented by what looks like kind of like a little cartoon style voice text box thing with a little speaker icon in it. And this is if you want to add an audio label to any part of your tactile graphic. This is specifically for a extra accessory you can get to go with TactileView if you want to. It is by no means required to use the TactileView design software. This training is going to be primarily on that software piece, not the external hardware piece. We may do something on that in the future. But I'm just going to tell you about these. So in case you happen to have that piece, or you just even see these and you're like, well, why didn't he tell me what these were? I'm just going to tell you what they are real quick. So that extra piece, those extra hardware pieces, the first ones we're talking about, is called the audio reading system. So what that lets you do is create tactile graphics inside TactileView, attach audio labels to certain parts of your graphic, and then you can emboss or emboss out that tactile graphic, get this little audio reading system hardware piece. You can put that tactile graphic that's embossed on this kind of little tablet with a little sensor, and you use a pen that tracks your movements, and you can click that pen on different parts of your Braille tactile graphic, and it will correspond to parts inside the software because you're running the software right alongside this. I don't know if I mentioned that. And it will basically, when you click your pen on the graphic, it clicks your pen on the same part inside of the TactileView software, which clicks on the audio label, so it plays the audio label. So effectively, it lets you create audio labeled tactile graphics to give your tactile graphics an extra audio component. It can be quite cool. That being said, it's some extra work to get that going, but it is kind of a neat idea. So if you have that, or maybe that strikes you as just awesome, you can do that, and that is called the audio reading system. It is another accessory that can be purchased alongside or together with the TactileView software. So that's what this audio labeling part is for. If we click on this, you'll notice that you can do self-defined text, which is basically you just type in whatever you want inside here, and it uses a speech synthesizer. You can upload a file if you want to, even script from a website, or if you have like an audio file, you can choose an audio file off your computer or from TactileView or from recent files. And so you can attach audio files as any of those ways, either using text-to-speech from a couple different sources or an audio file like an MP3 from a couple different sources as well. And you can test it and see what it's going to sound like and things like that. The next item looks like a red round record button here, and that's exactly what it is. If rather than using text or a file or an audio file, you want to just voice record using your computer's built-in microphone for that audio label, that is what that is for. You click on it, record whatever you want to say, stop, and it will add that recording as an audio label inside the tactile graphic. Be another alternative way to label it. And after that, we have this kind of like yellowish play button that in very tiny print it says MDA. MDA is yet a different accessory that can be purchased alongside TactileView. It would be an alternative to a tactile graphics embosser. MDA is short for motorized drawing arm. You can Google that and look on TactileView's website if you're interested, or ireat.com. They probably have it as well. It is basically a motorized drawing arm that uses a kind of plasticky type paper thing that it draws on top of, and it can draw out a tactile graphic using this kind of plasticky type paper. It would only really work for tactile graphics only, not a great Braille machine or anything like that. So anyway, if for any reason that sounds interesting, you can search that. And so basically this MDA thing would allow you to sketch this with your MDA if you have an MDA. So for the rest of these objects, I'm going to basically gloss over the fact that they exist, and you can do that for the rest of the objects. So I just want to give you a quick Or, well, that wasn't exactly quick, but I wanted to give you an explanation of those so you knew what they were when you stumbled across them, or if you happen to have one of those tools. But I don't find those to be super popular, so beyond this, we are not going to touch on those really anymore. And so that's what those are, and you will see them again with the other objects, but we'll leave it at that for description. Below that, we have kind of two more icons that look like kind of square boxes, kind of on top of one another, and this has to do with stacking different objects. Kind of hard to illustrate this with just simply lines, but basically you can stack objects, whether they be lines, circles, squares, triangles, other polygons. You can stack those on top of each other. So if you have one on top of the other, and one is covering up another one, you can move them in their layering system. So the first button is move to the front, so it moves whatever item you currently have clicked on forward in the stacking order. And the button below that says move to back, and that would move whatever item you have selected, whatever object, backwards behind other elements. So if you are stacking things on top of each other, you can use these to move them around the layering system. We'll show that a little bit later in more detail when we get into the other objects, where it's a little more obvious when things are covering each other up. Lines, like you can tell they cross, but you can't really tell that they're covering each other up so much. Below that, we have kind of an interesting little icon here. It looks like a little blue line with a down arrow to a black line, and if you hover your mouse over it, you'll notice a label that says Fuse with Bitmap. So if you remember back to kind of our previous episodes where we were talking about importing pictures and using the selection tool, things that are blue are objects and things that are black are part of the picture. Now, most of the time, objects are really a great thing, right? Because we can grab them, we can move them around, we can manipulate them, we can, add fills or change line styles. It's pretty great. But the one maybe potentially slight downside is if you grab your eraser tool and you try to erase an object, it does not work because an object kind of stays as is. So there could be a time that maybe you made a compound object with multiple multiple objects, or maybe you created something and you have created something out of objects, we'll say, and you really need to be able to erase part of it. And so that's where this Fuse with Bitmap comes in. It lets you turn objects, something blue, represented in blue, into part of the picture. So if I click on this, you'll notice when I do, my blue object line will immediately turn from blue to black, and it will become unselected. Now I can't go click on it anymore, right? It's no longer an object, it is now part of the picture. I can't click on it, I can't move it unless I use my selection tool, which we talked about earlier. But I can now use my eraser, and I could erase this, right? And so there are some scenarios where I will have maybe initially created something out of objects, manipulated them, placed them how I liked them, and then fused it with a bitmap so I could make a few cleanups or erases or edits on them. One of the things that kind of comes to mind for that would be maybe making a compound object. Like, say I drew out this circle here and I drew out this square here, and I kind of want them to be joined together. Well, I can go in and I can fuse both of those using that same feature. There they are, and maybe again I want to compound this, so I can grab my eraser and I can kind of erase that part of the circle that is overlapping my square, and now I made a compound object there, right? Something like that. Simple example, but gives you an idea what I'm talking about there. So something like that may be useful from time to time to be able to fuse an object with a bitmap. Going back to our line, we have a couple more items here. We can copy this if we want to. You can also just use Control-C to copy, just like anything else. You can also delete it. You can also just use the delete button on your keyboard as well, but they give you clickable buttons in here. And they have help, which kind of brings up a little help menu, which is, well, somewhat helpful. So that is our line tool. So that is most of the things you can do. You're going to notice a couple more items with some of our other objects because they have kind of a filled center, like our square, for example, if I draw out a square here. But for the most part, pretty darn similar. So if we draw out a square like I just did, and we go look at our menu for our square, you're going to notice, again, a lot of similar things here, but a couple extras. So starting at the top, we have size and position. So this is where you can go in and be very precise with your square if you want to. Choose exactly how long the sides are, where it's placed, etc. We can also do an alias, which again is that nicknaming. We can add a center to our shape if we want to. Sometimes this can be helpful for like doing radiuses and things like that. And the only reason you see this on the square and on the other round, like maybe a circle will have that and things like that, is it has a filled area, as where the line didn't have a filled area, so putting a dot at the center doesn't make sense. You can also rotate it, and so if we want to twirl this at maybe a 45 or something like that, we can do that. We can also center, just like on the line. We can also restrict our movement, just like before. We can change our line styles, right? So our outside to like a dot or dash pattern. Now we got another one on this one, which is a texture fill. And so this is pretty neat because I do like texture fills. We click on this, there's a few different options. You can say do not use texture, you can say use texture fill, or honestly, you can skip over the clicking use your texture fill and go straight to choosing a texture if you want to. They have a pretty good list of different type of textures in here. I'm not sure exactly how many this is, but it's like, I think around like 25, 30, something like that. Don't quote me on that, I could be way off. But anyway, they have a good variety here. Like we have some asterisks, block waves, brick pattern, some different dot dash line patterns, triangle patterns, hexagon patterns, fish scale, raindrops, double circles, dots, some filled squares, some filled triangles, plus signs, rain, stars, zigzags, mirrored half circles, lines, just to name a few. And so I always like these mirrored half circle ones, so you can see me using these multiple times. It's my default, my go-to always. So I'm going to click on my mirrored half circles and press OK. This takes me back to my select a fill window, where I also have a few more options here. I can also choose the size of the texture, and I can choose the rotation of the texture, which is neat, and it gives me a little box with a visual preview of that below. So this is kind of cool because you can actually recycle the same texture multiple times. So for example, this fish scale one I chose, I could make it, say, large at one rotation versus small at a different rotation, and to touch tactily, they will feel entirely different, like two completely different pattern fills. So you can play with that and recycle some of these patterns if you want to, or just kind of tailor the patterns to something you like the texture of more, and what have you. And then also down below, there's one kind of final option about the transparency of it. And so, do you want to be able to see things through your object or through your pattern or not? And so you can say, no, I don't want it to be transparent. So it blocks out anything that in my case, I'm adding a pattern fill to a square, right? So it would block out anything behind the pattern of the square. Or I could say, no, I don't want to cover the background. I want to be able to see things through my square, even with the pattern. And so you can make that pattern fill, or the area in between your pattern, I should say, transparent or not. So I'm going to make mine not transparent. So meaning if I move my square over the top of other things, it has hidden it. Now again, I can grab my square, I can move it around, I can grab one of my corners and I can resize, I can reshape, I can stretch it out, I can do whatever I want. Maybe turn it into a rectangle, etc. Now, something you'll notice as I am doing this, manipulating it like this, is my texture or pattern fill, whichever you want to call it, has stayed the exact same size. So even as I scale, it scales, but it adds more pattern or texture fill. The fill stays the same size, it just adds more fill as I scale it up, which is kind of neat. So when you did change that rotation or the size of the fill, it is keeping and retaining the size of that texture, that pattern, when you stretch or manipulate or resize your object. So that's kind of neat that it does that rather than stretching and scaling the pattern with it. The texture or pattern stays the same and adds more pattern if you make it bigger, or removes pattern, I guess, if you make it smaller. So just kind of neat little thing to point out there. Okay, moving on, after our pattern or texture fill here, we have also add color fill. So again, this is really only going to apply if you have an embosser that does multiple dot heights based on color, and or if you have one of those very rare ones that also does color, ink, and braille, then you might want to add color fills, and so they do have that option there as well. Moving on, we also have this little it's kind of a funky icon, honestly. It looks like a square with some lines just kind of running through it kind of at random. This is meant to be able to choose a transparent or non-transparent background. So we can choose that and make it so that when your object is on top of something, that you can see the things below it. So since I chose a pattern fill or texture fill on this, and I chose the texture not to be transparent, it's not transparent. But let me go ahead and just delete that square. Draw out a new square, and we'll go back. And now, right now, it is not transparent. I go click on that transparent button, and now you can see it is transparent. So those lines that it was covering up, you can now see them through the square. Go back and click on the transparent button again. It makes it non-transparent, so now it is covering up or hiding or blocking over the objects behind it. And so different scenarios, obviously, it might be helpful to have it transparent or not transparent, depending on what you're trying to create. Then we have those same 3 buttons, the add audio, the record audio, and draw with the MDA. Again, those are those separate components. We're just going to leave it at that and move on. We also have the object layering or stacking, which again makes a little more sense with filled objects like this. So I'm going to draw a circle as well. And so you will see that my circle I drew out was on top of my square because the circle is newer. And so there you go, my circle is on top. So I can go click on my circle and I can use one of those move to front or move to back. In this case, my circle is already in the front. So if I click on the move to back, you will now see all of a sudden my square is overlapping my circle. And so that's with object stacking. And of course, you can stack more than 2 objects if you want to, and moving those up or down within its layering system. And that's what those buttons are for. Going back to our square here, we also have that same fuse with bitmap. So again, normally this being a blue object where we can grab it, manipulate it, flip it around, resize all the time is usually pretty convenient. But you know what? Maybe you were drawing out or creating a tactile graphic where you really wanted, I don't know, like a 90-degree angle or something like that, and you want to erase 2 of the sides or something. I'm just making up random examples as I go here, but you get my drift. You could fuse that with bitmap, which would turn it into a black, which now it's part of the picture, and we could grab our eraser tool, erase it, and if we still need to move or scale it, we could use our selection tool for that. That is the square. Switching over to our circle, which is our next object on our list. This draws out circles, and effectively all of our items for circles, or all of our different options, is the exact same as with the square. We can draw out a circle, we can grab one of the sides or corners and turn it more into an oval if we wanted to. We can go up and go to size and position on our menu, and we can make it very precise. Maybe we want this square to be at 2 inches by 2 inches, or maybe we want it a 2 inch by 3 inch oval, or whatever we want. So if you need precision, you can use that option. If you want to use an alias to give it a nickname to find it easier in the list accessibly with a screen reader, you can do that. If you want to add a center or a dot to the center of your circle, you can do that. Actually, circles does do something kind of neat here. If I do that little dot, I can do a dot in the center with a label if I want to. I can add that in there. That can be kind of nifty. Circles also allow you to do... He's making a fool out of me. Coming in the next version, which I'm not using at the moment, you're going to be able to add radiuses using circles. There's a little preview for you. This will probably be great because that version will be out in the future. In the future, where you can actually just click and drag on the edge of your circle, and you're going to be able to add radiuses and make a pie chart and things like that very easily. I am not using that beta version at the moment, and I forgot that this version doesn't have it. So excuse me while I just tease a random feature that you may or may not have. But in the future, they're adding the ability to just click and add radiuses to your circle, which will be pretty darn neat. So glossing over that and moving on, with our circle, we can also rotate our circle, which of course rotating a perfect circle doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, but if you did turn it into an oval, that might make more sense to rotate it. Then you can center it. You can restrict your movement if you want to, or while you're moving it around, make sure you're moving it just up and down, just left and right, or just at a 45. You can change your line style there if you want a dot or dash pattern for the outside line. You can add a texture or pattern fill to it if you want to. You can add a color fill for those bossers that support it. You can make it transparent or not for layering it on top of stuff. There's those next 3 items, which again we're going to gloss over because those have to do with those other accessories for adding audio labels or sketching out with that MDA. We have those move to front or back options for moving up and down our layering system. We've got that same fuse with bitmap, which again, just remember that's just turning it into part of the picture so you can erase it. You can copy it and delete it. Again, you can also use Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, or you can hit the delete key on your keyboard, or you can click the button, whichever is more convenient. So basically, almost virtually identical options for circle versus square. All right, now I'm going to go create a new document just super quick, so I kind of have a blank working canvas, if you will. And there we go. It's taking a moment. Sorry, you guys. I know this is a long episode. My computer's getting sluggish because of it. There we go. Okay, we're getting close. But I want to talk about triangles because triangles are objects on here, and the cool thing about triangles is triangles are littered throughout math, right? Right triangles, isosceles triangles, equilateral triangles, especially like geometry and trigonometry, you're going to deal with a lot of triangles, right? So TactileView lets you create each of those different types of triangles and even be very precise about them. So you can click on their triangle tool, and even before we draw it out, or after, doesn't matter too much, you can choose, do you want a right triangle, an isosceles, an equilateral, or a scalene? So if y'all kind of remember back to, or perhaps you're working on this for a student, remember 30, 60, 90 right triangles? Well, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to grab my right triangle, click on that option, draw it out there, and voila, there we go, perfect right triangle for me immediately. And you'll notice that when I have my triangle clicked on, I have similar options to I have based to what I had with all my other objects thus far, but I got a few extras. So the first one is position of anchor points. So slightly different than size and position option that you found on the other objects, because now we're kind of getting into angles and stuff like that as well. So a little bit different label, but it's kind of the same concept. But because we have angles with triangles, we have a few more options than just simply sizing and position. So if I click on this, you'll bring up basically a sizing tool. We could change to a different type of triangle here if we wanted to. And then it gives me anchor point A, B, and C, which are the corners of your triangles. Now I happen to know, since I chose a right triangle, my anchor point A, which is my first option, you'll look down below and you will see a option for distance to left edge, angle in degrees, distance from A to C, which would be from point A to point C, and there's another one for distance from A to B. So if you want to change those lengths, you can do that here. You can also choose in the placement tools distance to top edge. Now, focusing in here, because this is probably the most important, I think, is on angle A. It says in degrees, it says 90, and it is grayed out. I cannot change it, and that is because angle A is my right angle, and I chose a right triangle, and so it's saying, hey, angle A is your right triangle. You're locked on in, right? But what I can do is I can go to either B or C here, which by default it's just 45 those, and I could change either one of those to say 30 or 60. So I'll change anchor point C, my angle C, to 30 degrees, hit my OK button, and voila, there is a perfect 30, 60, 90 right triangle. And now I might have to add some, side lengths in there with my braille label, maybe braille label my corners A, B, and C, X, Y, Z, whatever I want to do. But boom, got a perfect 30, 60, 90 right triangle, which is awesome. Now, even some more helpful stuff. So if we have this triangle clicked on and we move down past our different types of triangles, we have something here called angles and lines. It looks like a triangle with an A next to it with a few different lines in the triangle. If we click on this, this brings up a series of checkboxes basically, and you can just say I want this or I don't want that. The first one is your angle indication. So you might have noticed when I clicked away earlier from my triangle, I clicked off of it so it wasn't selected anymore, that my labels A, B, and C for my corners and my right triangle indicator all disappeared. And that's because, and you will notice that right now on screen they are in green. Green is a visual indicator that it is just on there for your visual reference. It is not actually going to emboss if it is in green. It is just a visual indicator. You'll also notice that with our braille label where it says title up in the corner. Again, title is just the default name there. But in the background I have both braille and print for my labels turned on. But of course when you send this to a braille printer, it's not going to print the letters, but it still shows in printed letters title for mine. And then that is in green, again in green, just showing it's not going to emboss the letters title, it's going to emboss the braille characters for title. So green is a indicator to you that it's just on screen for your reference. So my A, B, and C on my triangle, as well as my right triangle indicator, currently are green, indicating they will not braille, but that they are just there for my reference. But if I want my angle indicator, there is a box that says angle indication. If I click on that, you'll notice my right triangle indicator switch from green to blue. Now that it's blue, it will emboss. And if I click away from it later, you'll notice that it doesn't disappear because now it is there, so it will braille. Also, by default, TactileView braille labels your corners A, B, and C. Now, currently, they are not braille labels. They just label them A, B, C for you, so you got reference. And if I do want those to be labeled in braille, I can check a box, and all of a sudden, voila, I've got A, B, and C braille labeled corners. Alternatively, if you wanted to use something other than ABC, you could uncheck that and overlay your own labels for XYZ or whatever you want to use on top of that. They just default to ABC. You could choose something else and manually put those labels in. They also have options for altitude lines from corners A, B, or C, median lines from corners A, B, or C, and bisector lines for corners A, B, or C. And if you want any of those, you simply just check a box and TactileView will automatically add that into your triangle for you automatically. Now, I don't want any of those. I just wanted to braille my right triangle indicators. I'll also braille my corners A, B, and C and hit OK. And voila, there you go. Now you'll see, even though I've clicked away from my triangle, I no longer have it currently selected. My right triangle indicator is in there, as well as my corners A, B, and C labeled in braille. Now, if I go back and click on it again, we go through the rest of our kind of sub-menu for this item, you will notice some very familiar things, such as add an alias if you want to nickname it, rotate it if you want to rotate it, center it, restrict your movement to just horizontal, vertical, left, right, up, down, and that's those 45. Change line styles if you want a dot or dashed line out on the outside. Add fills if you want to fill on this. Add color fills for when that's applicable or you have an applicable embosser. Change whether or not it is transparent or not. So when you have it layered on top of something, you can see what's through it or not. Again, those same options for adding the audio labels for the audio reading system if you had it. Those same options for moving things front and back in the layering system if you have different things on top of one another. Same thing with fuse with bitmap. Same option for copy and delete and help as well. Actually, I do want to just real quickly note about fuse with bitmap. This can be a particularly helpful option for triangles, because as well as triangles in geometry and trigonometry, also just angles are a pretty common thing, right? While TactileView doesn't have an option just for an angle, you could create that angle first with a triangle, then fuse said triangle with bitmap, and then use your eraser tool to clean up the parts of the triangle you don't want. In this case, I'm erasing my right triangle and my corner C and just leaving my angle B there, which I know is a 60-degree angle. So I could have, maybe I just need a 60-degree angle. I could have created a triangle with a 60-degree and then fused it with my bitmap and then erased all the other parts I didn't want, right? So that is an option for you as well. Okay, moving on here, we also have a polygon tool. The polygon tool, I will say in the future, is getting a major upgrade. That is also part of that future version I am beta testing that I will you will get in the future, and I might have to do an updated episode later. But this is the current version of TactileView, so we'll stick with this. Basically, when you want to create a polygon, you just click and you place out your rough dots. I'm doing just the world's worst stop sign here. It just ignore this. But anyway, I created some sort of octagon there. Not a good one, but anyway, you can rough draw it out. You can also go back after the fact and grab any of your corners and kind of move and manipulate, add extra corners, delete corners, things like that. And you can do a much better job than I did. You can also go over to the sub menu as well. You can delete an anchor point if you have one clicked on, like I accidentally added an extra one there. You can also go into your position of anchor points, kind of like we did with the triangle, and there's all these different points here. And what we could do to say maybe make a perfect octagon is make all the side lengths the same length or something like that. So it says there's an option here for distance to previous anchor point. So maybe I could make all of those like 1 inch or something like that, and then I have a perfect octagon at the end of the day. So you could do that, or again, rough draw it out. Whoops, I didn't mean to delete that entirely. Let's go back and do that one again. I'll just draw, it's actually, well, it is a polygon, it's not actually a perfect square. Anyway, you can also add aliases, you can add extra points to it, you can delete extra points, you can change the size and position of it, you can rotate it, you can center it, just like you can with all the other stuff. You can restrict your movement if you just want to move horizontally, vertically, left, right, up, down, and at an angle. You can change your line styles, you can add a pattern or texture fill, you can add a color fill, you can make it transparent or not for layering. You can add those different audio labels for those extra components of TactileView. You can move things up or down in your layering system. You can fuse it with the bitmap image if you want to be able to erase part of it. You can copy it, you can delete it, and so on. And so that is kind of our last object. We do a few more icons here that are in blue that are technically objects, but they're a little bit different. So we're going to tackle those in another episode here. And with that, let's see you in the next one.